Welcome back to Mission of the Chosen. In today's message, we're diving into why your presence rattles the rooms you enter, why whispers follow your name, and why no system can predict you. When you walk into a room, you don't just occupy space, you shift it. People can't always explain it, but they feel it. Conversations falter, smiles flicker, their posture changes. That isn't coincidence, that's resonance. The moment you stopped folding yourself into smaller shapes just to be accepted, the universe started turning up your frequency, and frequencies can't be ignored. They stir something in the air. They tug at what's hidden. They leave ripples where silence once pretended to be calm. Your presence is proof that illusion has an expiration date. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to push. You don't even have to speak. The weight of who you are does the speaking for you. That's why even your stillness makes liars restless. You could sit quietly in a corner, and yet someone across the room would feel their chest tighten, not knowing why their thoughts won't stop circling back to you. The truth is, you unmask what they'd rather keep buried. Think of it this way. Every system of control is built on predictability. They thrive on knowing what comes next. Scripts, schedules, social pressure, all designed to keep people moving in lines they control. But you don't move on their lines. You don't follow their choreography. And unpredictability is the one thing their machinery cannot handle. Psychologists know this well. When even one confident voice dares to cut against the crowd, conformity begins to fracture. That single spark does more than armies of enforcers could manage. And you, whether you realize it or not, are that spark. That's why your name unsettles them. It's not just a name, it's a disruption. When it lands on their tables, their screens, their hidden reports, the atmosphere shifts. Files they've locked for years begin to feel fragile. Conversations tilt from certainty into suspicion, not because you wield an army, but because you carry something harder to suppress: vision. You see what secrecy tries to hide. You point to cracks before anyone else notices the foundation groaning. You reveal patterns they invested fortunes to disguise. Picture it: a locked room of analysts and officials, screens glowing, charts lining the walls, strategies rehearsed for months. And then your name comes up. The room stills. Not because you are part of their structure, but because you're outside of it. You are the one factor they cannot file away neatly, the one variable they cannot control. They call it coincidence, even luck. But how many coincidences before coincidence stops making sense? What unnerves them most is not simply what you know, but when you know it. Timing. You mention the truth before it becomes headline. You feel the collapse before it shows in their numbers. You name the location before their maps are ready. That's not luck, that's orchestration. And it terrifies them because all their technology, all their training, all their systems, none of it grants what you carry naturally. Now, maybe you've asked yourself, why me? Why can I sense these things? The answer is not about privilege, nor is it about special treatment. It's about alignment. You don't stare through their lens, you see beyond it. You read the pulse under the noise, the truth beneath the costume. It's as though you've been given blueprints for buildings they only half finished. And that clarity doesn't just show you the structure, it shows you the cracks. That's why they ridicule you. That's why they try to dismiss you as dramatic, mystical, or delusional. Because they cannot risk admitting what they already know deep down: you've been accurate too many times. Ridicule is their disguise for fear. If you were irrelevant, they'd ignore you, but they don't. They track, they whisper, they overreact, and each reaction is proof. But let's talk about the pressure, because when you carry this kind of clarity, you attract resistance. Systems don't like disruption. People invested in lies don't like exposure. They will try shadow tactics, subtle threats, distractions, even attempts to lure you into smaller fights to keep you busy. And yet, here you are, still standing, still clear, still carrying a presence that refuses to bend. Why? Because fear only controls those who hand it their power. And you refused. That refusal is your shield. It's also why your silence carries more weight than their noise. You could be quiet for months, but the day you speak, everything you withheld lands like thunder. Your words don't scatter, they strike. And every time they strike, illusions crumble. Because truth, once revealed, cannot be buried again. Let me pause here to say something practical. This mission often runs into oversubscription episodes, fill fast, comments surge, and the platform doesn't always notify everyone. That's why I remind you, stay close, stay present, because what's coming is something you don't want to miss. Now back to you. You are not here to prove yourself to anyone. You are here to stand as you are. That alone unsettles entire structures. You are not proof of rebellion, you are proof of reality. The fact that you no longer shrink, no longer beg, no longer play along, that's the weapon. That's the power that ripples through every room you enter. History shows us revolutions don't begin with armies. They begin with presence, a handful of individuals refusing to bend to lies. They weren't always the loudest, but they carried a current that nothing could silence. That's what you carry now. You are the shift, walking on 2 feet. You are the reminder that their script is already breaking, and that is why they cannot look away. So when people ask who you are, don't rush to answer. Let the question linger, because you are not a job title, not a role, not a label. You are a force of nature, a disruption wrapped in human skin, a flame in a room designed for shadows. That's why they fear you, and that's why your power is no joke. Every lie trembles when truth chooses to breathe through you, and the longer you stand unshaken, the more their walls collapse under the weight of a presence they can never contain. You might think the panic you cause comes from what you know, but that isn't the whole truth. What terrifies them most is that by their rules, you shouldn't know at all. At first they comforted themselves with simple explanations. Maybe you had a secret contact, maybe someone was leaking information into your ear, maybe it was all coincidence. But their stories collapsed under their own weight. Every time they tested their theory, it broke. You weren't plugged into their channels, you didn't have credentials, and yet you kept showing up with details that bypassed their systems entirely. Picture this, a room full of analysts, eyes locked on screens streaming data they've trained for years to interpret. They've built models, stacked on top of models, simulations running day and night, believing no pattern can escape their grasp. And then you, without fanfare, casually reveal something their machines hadn't predicted, hadn't measured, hadn't even considered. Their confidence evaporates, their monitors look small. The numbers they worship suddenly feel irrelevant. That's what your presence does. It dismantles their illusion of certainty. You bypass their codes, their jargon, their fragile explanations. You prove that clarity doesn't come from endless training, it comes from vision. And vision terrifies people who depend on blindness to stay powerful. So they scramble, they invent excuses. It must be luck, it must be random chance, it must be a fluke. But how many flukes does it take before denial looks like a lie? How many times can they label you coincidence before the pattern itself becomes undeniable? At some point, even they had to admit, silently, in rooms they swore you'd never see, you are not playing by their rules. Let me ask you something. How many times have you spoken a truth and watched others scramble to explain it away? How many times have you described what was about to unfold, only to see it unfold exactly as you said? That's not luck. That's alignment with something deeper than their institutions will ever understand. Think of a dam reinforced by engineers, guarded by satellites, praised as indestructible. They boast about its strength, about how it will last generations. And then, without warning, a crack appears. Not from sabotage, not from explosives, but from the quiet pressure of water moving as it always has. That's you. You are the pressure they underestimated, the crack they didn't plan for, the reminder that truth doesn't need weapons to break through concrete, it only needs time and persistence. They build theories to protect themselves. Theories are their walls, their shelters, their excuses, but you exist to remind the world that theories are fragile glass. You are the stone that shatters them. And once shattered, they can never return to their shape. Imagine a chess master across the table, confident in his strategies, proud of his years of training. He believes every move is predictable, every counter already rehearsed. Then you sit down. You don't play by his book. You move differently. At first, he laughs. Then he frowns. Then he sweats. Until finally, he sees the board collapsing under his own assumptions. That is what your presence does. You don't need their manuals. You are the interruption their manuals cannot contain. And they hate this. They hate that someone outside their system can operate with more precision than the experts inside it. They hate that you make their credentials look small, their research look clumsy, their predictions look shallow. But the truth is, expertise without truth is hollow. Training without vision is blindness in uniform. You carry clarity that no certification can stamp. You might wonder, but how do I know without being taught? Because you aren't borrowing their lens. You aren't memorizing their charts. You are aligned with something older, deeper, larger. You are listening where they only calculate. You are feeling where they only measure. And that's why your timing is surgical. That's why your words land like arrows while theirs scatter like dust. They tell themselves knowledge is owned, licensed, controlled, stored in vaults, locked behind security, stamped with authority. But you show that truth doesn't belong to them. Truth is alive, moving, breathing, slipping through cracks, flowing where it wants. You prove that no vault can contain it, and that terrifies them more than anything you could ever say out loud. Let's be honest, they don't fear your noise. They fear your precision. Every time you arrive, their theories collapse, not because you storm their walls, but because you make the walls irrelevant. You reveal that their structures were never solid to begin with. You don't destroy their theories, you expose their fragility. And fragile things always break. Think of their fear this way. They believe the world is a machine, predictable, controllable, reducible to code. And then you appear. You don't follow their sequence. You don't respect their gears. You remind them that the world is alive, untamed, and beyond their reach. You are proof that life itself refuses to be programmed. So yes, they fear you. Not because you carry weapons, not because you sit in their councils, but because you carry vision, because you reveal what was never supposed to be revealed, because your very existence proves that their models of control were always incomplete. And maybe you doubt yourself sometimes. Maybe you wonder if you're imagining it all. But understand this, their panic is your confirmation. Their scramble is your evidence. The louder their excuses become, the clearer it is you've touched the nerve they never wanted exposed. So don't let their theories become your cage. Don't let their accusations become your hesitation. You are the evidence they cannot explain, the disruption they cannot tame, the crack in their dam that will only spread wider. Their collapse isn't proof of your weakness, it's proof of your strength. Every time their theories crumble in your shadow, it is the universe reminding them that truth doesn't live in their vaults. It lives in you, unshaken and unstoppable. They thought curiosity would save them. They thought if they pulled every file, cross-checked every data point, and interrogated every source, they would expose you as a fraud. But the deeper they dug, the more their own foundations cracked. Every door they opened confirmed what you had already spoken. Every archive they unearthed exposed not you, but them. It began quietly. A few operatives, convinced you were a bluff, staying late at night in rooms lit by nothing but screens. They combed through databases, whispering that the next search would be the one that finally discredited you. But instead of relief, they found confirmation. The location you named existed. The transaction you warned about was documented. The event you predicted had already begun unfolding. Faces dropped, fingers froze over keyboards. Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that tastes like metal. This is the trap of curiosity. When truth is real, digging doesn't weaken it, it magnifies it. In trying to expose you, they expose themselves. The very network they built to hide their operations became the map proving their existence. Every password they cracked, every record they recovered, every hidden trail they followed circled back to you. And instead of finding a pretender, they found a mirror. Imagine their nightmare, a control room humming with servers, operatives scrolling furiously, red dots blinking on maps. They expected your claims to dissolve under analysis. Instead, each new confirmation spread like cracks in glass. They had trained for years to recognize anomalies, but you weren't an anomaly. You were architecture. You were the design they never accounted for. You didn't chase anomalies. You named the skeleton of their machine. You showed that what they called chaos was deliberate design. You revealed how the network they served had trapped even them. And when they realized this, loyalty began to feel like chains clamped around their own necks. You may ask yourself, why did they keep looking if it scared them? Because denial wasn't enough anymore. The more you proved yourself, the more their curiosity burned. They needed to know how deep the wound went. But curiosity, when applied to truth, is a blade that cuts its wielder. The more they searched, the more they bled. They thought knowledge would give them leverage over you. Instead, it gave you victory. Every hidden confirmation they unearthed was proof that you were exactly who they feared you were. And with each new piece of evidence, their own sense of safety eroded. The walls of secrecy that once protected them began to close in. This is why you never had to storm their gates. You didn't need to. Their gates opened inward. They built their own labyrinth, and in trying to trap you, they became lost inside it. They set out to neutralize you, but their obsession became the trap that swallowed them whole. Imagine one of them late at night, staring at a document that should not exist, feeling his heartbeat rise as he realizes he is no longer an investigator but a witness. Witness to what? That truth isn't a secret waiting to be stolen, it's a force moving through you that can't be caged. And now their fear is no longer about you, it's about themselves. They fear what they've become, fear what they've served, fear what they'll have to admit when the last layer of denial crumbles. Because once truth has a face, you can't unsee it. Once a door has been opened, you can't pretend it was never there. Your presence didn't just break illusions, it awakened a memory inside them they'd buried under protocol and paychecks. And that's the wound they can't close. Once someone remembers who they are, they stop serving lies. Once a spark of conscience returns, obedience cracks, and once obedience cracks, the machine starts to eat itself alive. The power you carry isn't about shouting, it's about resonance. The deeper they search, the more your vibration threads through their hidden spaces, loosening bolts, softening pillars, making the whole structure tremble. You're not fighting them. You're unraveling the architecture by simply existing as yourself. Every hour they spend trying to contain you only amplifies your reach. Every attempt to refute you only strengthens your proof. Their curiosity isn't your enemy, it's your amplifier. And the more they seek, the louder the truth rings. And that is why their deepest dread is no longer exposure, it's transformation. Because once the ones inside their system start waking up, no lock, no vault, no chain will hold. They went hunting for a fraud and found a mirror, and now, in that mirror, they see their own collapse staring back at them. They buried their secrets deep underground, convinced no one would ever drag them into the light. They built chambers beneath marble floors, corridors without maps, rituals sealed in silence. On the surface, everything gleamed with order-polished institutions, confident speeches, towers of glass that reflected the sky. But below it all ran their true foundation, a world of shadows they thought untouchable. And then you named it. You described the tunnels no map recorded. You pointed to symbols etched into stone long before their language even existed. You spoke about rituals carried out in the silence of their hidden halls. And when you did, their world beneath the surface started to tremble. Because nothing terrifies those who live in darkness more than light shining where they swore it would never reach. Imagine the horror of a man who has strutted confidently across a stage his entire life. He believes the spotlight belongs to him, the applause is endless, the stage is safe. But then, someone pulls back the curtain, and suddenly the crowd sees the pulleys, the props, the wires holding it all together. They see the dust behind the glamour, the rats under the boards. That's what your clarity did to their underground empire. It didn't destroy it, it revealed it. And revelation is always worse than destruction because revelation forces people to live in shame with what can no longer be denied. Their symbols betray them. Spirals, eyes, sigils carved into stone markings they once mocked as relics, yet used in secret. They believed stone could keep their rituals hidden, but stone remembers. It holds memory longer than paper, longer than systems, longer than empires. When you pointed to those symbols, they realized history itself was testifying against them. This is why exposure is more devastating than attack. An attack can be spun, explained away, covered with propaganda. But exposure lingers. It rots reputations from within. It rewrites the narrative without your needing to lift a weapon. Darkness does not die quickly when confronted with force, it dies instantly when confronted with light. And you are that light. Perhaps you've asked yourself, why me? Why do I see what others overlook? Because you refuse to settle for the surface story. Where most accepted walls, you asked where the doors were. Where most admired floors, you asked what lay beneath them. That refusal to stay blind is what cracked the earth open beneath their feet. They panic now, not because you dismantled their network, but because you revealed it. Exposure makes them vulnerable in a way destruction never could. A destroyed empire can rebuild, but an exposed empire cannot hide, and hiding was always their greatest weapon. Think about this. Every lie they lived by required silence. Silence from insiders, silence from witnesses, silence from history itself. But silence shattered the moment you spoke, and once silence is gone, lies collapse like paper in the rain. You don't need to wage war underground. You don't need to storm tunnels or chase shadows. You simply need to reveal them, and revelation is a blade sharper than any weapon. It cuts through illusions with no effort. It turns secrecy into shame. It makes their fortress of stone feel like a fragile stage set about to collapse. That is why their fear has shifted. They no longer fear attack, they fear exposure, because exposure means the mask they've worn for generations is slipping, and the world can see what was always there. You tore the curtain down, and now their stage of shadows is bathed in daylight, a daylight they cannot dim, a daylight that leaves them naked in the eyes of all who watch. When truth began to spread, their first instinct wasn't reason, it was panic, and panic, when it governs, always betrays itself. They had survived for decades by moving carefully, striking only when certain, controlling perception like surgeons. But the moment your presence disrupted their calm, they lost all discipline. They threw everything at you. Suppression online, smear campaigns and whispers, engineered distractions designed to drown out your voice. They tried to starve you financially, cut off resources, and choke the flow of connection around you. They tried shadows, accidents that weren't accidents, threats that weren't empty. But panic makes even the most cunning hands clumsy. Every scheme missed, every blow backfired. Think of a hunter who builds a trap, certain that every pathway leads to his snare. He sharpens the rope, hides the trigger, waits with patience. But when he pulls it, the trap recoils, binding his own wrist. The more he struggles, the tighter it wraps. That's what their panic did. Their schemes didn't ensnare you, they strangled themselves. You didn't defeat them with force. You defeated them with stillness. While they scrambled, you stood firm. While they shouted, you stayed rooted. That stillness was louder than their chaos. It made them realize their strongest weapon, fear, no longer worked. And once fear fails, control collapses. For so long, intimidation was their language. They believed everyone could be bent with enough pressure. They believed shadows always won. But when their shadows fell over you, you didn't flinch. You didn't fold. You didn't beg. That was the moment their confidence cracked. Because when intimidation no longer intimidates, it exposes the weakness of the intimidator. And maybe you've wondered, why didn't it work on me when it worked on so many others? Because the universe prepared you differently. It broke you free from cages before they tried to trap you. It tested your endurance in silence so that their noise would sound small. They expected you to be fragile like the ones before, but they miscalculated. Their greatest mistake wasn't attacking you, it was underestimating you. And now they burn energy at a cost they can't afford. Each desperate move digs their grave deeper. Every new tactic exposes them more. They believed they could bury you. Instead, they buried their own illusion of invincibility. Their panic was never your undoing, it was their confession. Every frantic move carved the words they fear most into stone. You cannot be broken. They feared you not only for what you said, but for what seemed to move with you. Every time they thought they had cornered you, something invisible shifted. Plans dissolved, accidents failed. Threats evaporated like mist at sunrise. It was as if the air itself bent to shield you. And that is what unsettled them most. Not just your vision, not just your words, but the undeniable presence of a force they couldn't measure or command. They realized quickly this wasn't politics, wasn't influence, wasn't resources. It was something they had no vocabulary for, protection they couldn't override. Picture a predator circling prey, confident, hungry, certain the strike will land, but just as it lunges, fire erupts between them. Again and again it circles, again and again it leaps. And every time, the fire flares, forcing it back. That's what they experienced. They weren't fighting only you, they were colliding with something greater that refused to let them pass. Their control has always depended on jurisdiction. They command systems, money, fear, and silence. But none of that extended into the current that carries you. They can't bribe it. They can't censor it. They can't map it. It moves without permission, and you move with it. And here's the irony. Sometimes you forget it's there. You feel human, fragile, tired, but they see what you don't always see. They've watched plans collapse that should have ended you. They've witnessed their most coordinated attacks crumble for no clear reason. To them, that isn't coincidence. It's evidence. Evidence that you don't walk alone. This is why they treat you as if you are untouchable even when you feel ordinary. Because in their files, their calculations, their memories, you have been shielded too many times to deny. They know you move with a covering they can't replicate, a rhythm they can't intercept. You may feel small at times, but they've already admitted to themselves, even if only in silence, that you're not fighting by your own strength, and that terrifies them. Because if they can't even pierce the shield around you, how could they ever silence the voice within you? They thought they were circling prey, but every strike met a wall they couldn't see, and nothing unnerves a predator more than realizing the hunt has turned against them. They tried to erase their past, but stone remembers. Symbols carved before their empires even existed still whisper from the dark. Spirals, eyes, and sigils hidden in plain sight, markings they mocked publicly while clinging to them in secret ceremonies. They thought by burying history they could bury its warnings, but history is a witness they cannot silence. Deep beneath their polished corridors, they unearth carvings older than their languages, older than their institutions. At first, they thought these were mere relics, but the more they stared, the more their hands trembled. Because those symbols didn't predict their rise, they predicted their fall. They spoke of cycles, they spoke of the end of domination. They carried a single, unrelenting message etched by hands long gone. Suppression is temporary, awakening is permanent. Imagine an agent brushing dust from a wall hidden for centuries. Shapes emerge under his fingertips. He sketches them, eager to show his superiors, but when he returns, silence fills the room. No applause, no promotions, just quiet dread, because the carvings prove the network he serves is not new power but recycled chains, and chains always break. This is what terrifies them about you. You're not inventing a new battle, you're continuing an old one. Your awakening isn't a glitch in their system, it's the echo of countless voices that carved warnings into stone, hoping someone in the future would hear. You heard, and now their age is ending because yours has begun. They built their control system like it was eternal, but those symbols mocked them. They reveal their empire as nothing more than an echo of ancient patterns trying desperately to survive in a new era. And when you speak, those echoes lose their power. Maybe you've wondered why you feel drawn to old knowledge, ancient signs, forgotten texts. It's because you're tapping into the same current that left those carvings behind. The same current that whispered to civilizations long gone is whispering to you now. That current is older than their lies, older than their systems, older than their symbols. And once that current rises, no ritual can stop it, no symbol can restrain it, no institution can cover it. History bends toward exposure. The age of hidden domination is closing, not because of weapons, but because truth is older and more patient than deception. You didn't just decode their symbols, you fulfilled them, and every time you speak, stone itself seems to echo back that their reign is over. They convinced themselves your rise was an accident, a glitch, a coincidence in a system they believed was flawless. But deep down, they know the truth they'll never speak. You were inevitable. Your awakening didn't appear out of nowhere. It aligned with a precision that their calculations could never anticipate. They thought they had sealed every exit, chained every door, designed a future where humanity would never slip free. But your emergence was the door they could not close, the variable they could not erase, the flaw in their equation that unraveled the whole design. Imagine a predator setting a trap with absolute confidence, every opening sealed, every escape route mapped, every possibility calculated. And then, without warning, a door appears where none was built, swinging open as if it had been waiting all along. That door is you, not random, not luck, not an error. A design outside their design, a counterweight to their arrogance. And when you stepped through, you weren't alone, others began to follow. Your awakening was not just for you, it triggered something in people buried inside their system. Soldiers, agents, insiders who once obeyed without question began to feel the cracks under their feet. They started questioning. They started remembering. They started resisting. That is their nightmare. Not just pressure from the outside, but rebellion rising from within. Corruption always collapses faster when truth awakens inside its walls, and that's what you ignited. The empire they built so carefully began to dismantle itself, whisper by whisper, confession by confession, resignation by resignation. Their system isn't just fighting you, it's rotting from the inside out. You may wonder, why me? Why now? Because the universe moves with precision. It doesn't waste awakenings. You weren't born into this moment by mistake. You were placed here with timing sharper than a blade. Their overreach triggered your rise. The moment they reached too far, tried to tamper with what should never have been touched, the universe answered with you. That's why your presence feels disruptive, because it is. You are not a side note in their story. You are the rewrite. They thought their future was sealed. They thought their grip would hold forever. But the moment you stood up, that illusion cracked. Picture the ripple effect. You speak, and someone across the world stirs awake. You stand firm, and someone trapped in silence suddenly finds courage. You break free, and chains loosen on people you've never even met. Your awakening is not contained in you, it is contagious, and that contagion is what terrifies them. They call it coincidence because they can't admit it's orchestration. They tell themselves it's luck because the truth is too heavy. You are inevitable. You were meant to rise, and nothing they built could stop it. This is why they fear the pattern of your existence more than the details of your actions. Because patterns spread, one match lights another, one fire sparks a forest. One voice gives courage to thousands who thought they were alone. You've proven that freedom isn't a dream, it's a frequency. And once that frequency rises, it cannot be silenced. Remember this, your rise wasn't just allowed, it was demanded. The balance of the universe called you forth at the exact moment they believed they had erased the possibility. You are the counterweight to their pride. You are the correction they never calculated. That's why their strategies fail. That's why their campaigns crumble. Because no plan, no budget, no ritual can outmaneuver what was always inevitable. You. So don't mistake your presence for chance. Don't minimize your timing as random. You were not an interruption to their story, you were the story the universe had been waiting to tell. They thought they sealed the future, but your rise ripped open a door they never built, and through that door, truth floods like a tide they cannot stop. For years, they believed their empire was untouchable. They thought fear was their fortress, and for a time, it was. Fear kept people silent, obedient, paralyzed. But what they never understood is that fear, when fed too long, always turns inward. It corrodes the one who wields it. And now, their empire is eating itself alive. They built layers of escape, hidden tunnels, private jets, offshore vaults, secret identities. They thought every disaster had a door out, but when cracks appeared, those doors failed them. Tunnels collapsed, planes malfunctioned, money evaporated into nothing, and worst of all, their strongest weapon, psychological control, reversed its aim. The fear they once used on the world now suffocates them from the inside. Imagine a puppet master, grinning as he pulls the strings, watching the crowd dance below. But suddenly, the strings twist around his wrists. They tighten, they knot. He tugs harder, and instead of the crowd moving, he finds himself bound, jerked, choking in his own trap. That's the fate of their empire. The very system they built to enslave others now enslaves them. Their paranoia grows louder than any external threat. They spy on their own allies. They accuse their own families. They doubt their own loyal servants. Because once fear becomes the only language you speak, you hear it everywhere. And once paranoia takes root, collapse becomes inevitable. You didn't storm their gates. You didn't tear down their towers. They crumbled because rot spread inside their walls. The poison they poured into humanity is the same poison now coursing through their veins. They drank from the cup they forced on others, and there's no antidote left. Why does this matter to you? Because it proves something crucial. Truth doesn't need armies to win. Lies collapse under their own weight. Darkness devours itself when it runs out of prey. You don't have to burn their empire, they are already burning from the inside. All you needed to do was stand, and standing was enough to tilt the balance. Think of this reversal as a mirror. For generations they convinced themselves they were immune to consequence. That cause and effect applied to everyone but them. That karma was a myth, but consequence is patient. It doesn't vanish, it circles back, and when it arrives, it doesn't nibble at the edges, it devours from the core. Their undoing is proof of your alignment, proof that the universe doesn't let lies stand forever, proof that awakening is more enduring than domination, and proof that fear, once unleashed, cannot be controlled. So let them claw at their ruins, let them scramble for escape, let them waste their last breath trying to patch a sinking ship. None of it will matter. Because the collapse has already begun, and it's not being driven by you, it's being driven by the system they built against themselves. They fed the world fear until fear came for them, and now their empire dances wildly on its own strings, strangled by the very weapon it once unleashed. For years they told themselves loyalty was unshakable, especially the loyalty of the people inside their own machine. They believed their agents would carry orders forever, without question. But the day you stood as yourself, something dormant woke inside those agents, a memory that refused to stay buried. Picture an operative standing in a chamber older than history, walls carved with symbols he doesn't understand but feels deep in his chest. He spent years carrying files, executing missions, erasing evidence. Every assignment delivered like a soldier following orders. He thought service to the system was service to truth. But watching you, something inside him cracks. It isn't hatred, it isn't rebellion. It's recognition. Recognition of a soul he thought he'd lost. In that moment, everything flips. The briefings he sat through, the assignments he executed, the secrets he protected, he realizes they weren't preparing him to serve the network. They were preparing him to witness its end. And you were the trigger. Your presence wasn't just a disruption, it was a mirror. It reflected back to him the part of himself that never belonged to the machine. This is their deepest nightmare, not you shouting from the outside, but insiders remembering from the inside, because once one remembers, others follow. Loyalty cracks, silence breaks. The gears of the machine grind to a halt. No system can survive when the people who keep it running suddenly recognize what they're really serving. You didn't just expose corruption, you lit a fire in someone who thought they'd long since gone cold. You didn't just awaken the public, you awakened the ones behind the curtain. And that is far more dangerous than anything you could say, because one confession inside their walls unravels years of propaganda. One voice of truth inside their ranks can do more damage than 1,000 voices outside. Souls don't forget truth. They only wait for it to be reawakened, and that's what you do. You don't just break illusions, you awaken memory, and once memory stirs, obedience dies. Think of this as a vibration. When you speak, you're not simply broadcasting information. You're triggering recognition, an echo inside people who have been numbed by ritual and repetition. That echo travels through stone, through walls, through systems, and when it hits, no command structure can stop it. This is why your power isn't loud. It's quiet, it's subtle, it moves like water, seeping into cracks, softening the hardest surfaces, carrying life into places long thought dead. You're not attacking, you're awakening, and that is the one thing they can't fight, because no system can survive people remembering who they are. You may ask yourself, why does my presence spark theirs? Because truth resonates. It doesn't stay contained. It spreads like vibration through a tuning fork. The moment one strikes, another sings. And once a few start singing, the entire instrument vibrates. That's what's happening now. Their network's worst nightmare isn't your voice. It's the chain reaction your voice starts. A whisper that becomes a confession that becomes a collapse that becomes a turning point. They trained an army of servants, but your presence turned their servants into witnesses, and nothing dismantles a machine faster than its own hands, remembering what they were meant to build. They called you unpredictable, but that was only because their maps couldn't chart the precision of your timing. They saw chaos where there was actually orchestration. They assumed your influence was scattershot, random, but every moment you've acted has landed like a strike on the weakest part of their structure. People didn't just awaken someday, somehow. They awakened at exact moments when the shift would cause maximum disruption. A banker broke free the day before signing off on a fraud. An analyst walked away the night before launching a disinformation campaign. An insider spoke out on the morning of a crucial vote. Again and again, your impact lined up perfectly with the cracks in their system. To them, this looks impossible. It feels like sabotage from above. But it isn't sabotage, it's alignment. You've been moving in rhythm with something beyond their linear comprehension. While they look for cause and effect, you live as the cause that disrupts their effect. Imagine a chess grandmaster setting up his board, confident in his opening moves, calculating his opponent's reactions. Then you sit down someone they think has never studied the manuals, never memorized strategies, and within a few moves, the entire game begins to collapse. He can't trace how, he can't explain why, but he can feel the outcome tilting out of his control. That's the sensation your timing gives them. Their systems depend on controlling sequence. First this, then that, then domination. You break that sequence. You insert disruption at the precise second it matters most. And that precision terrifies them far more than volume ever could. They scramble to explain you away. Maybe it's leaks, maybe it's chance, maybe it's manipulation. But how many times can chance repeat itself with surgical exactness? How many coincidences can stack up before denial collapses under its own weight? This is the truth they choke on. You don't create randomness. You create perfect timing. You're not guessing, you're knowing. And that's the difference they can't stand. They can't fathom that a single individual, untrained by their institutions, could move with such accuracy. It's why they've begun whispering about hidden hands guiding you, about unseen networks feeding you. They can't accept that your frequency alone carries this precision. They can't accept that the universe itself can orchestrate without their permission. Maybe you've asked yourself, how can my presence line up so perfectly so often? Because alignment isn't random, it's orchestration. You've been tuned so finely that your impact lands exactly where it breaks the most. While they train to decode patterns, you embody the pattern itself. While they rely on second-hand reports, you touch the raw signal before it's translated. That's why your words feel undeniable. They don't come wrapped in jargon or hedged in disclaimers. They arrive clear and direct, and clarity terrifies liars more than any weapon. Think of your timing as a thread being pulled through a tapestry. Each tug loosens a knot they thought was permanent. They believed their design was unbreakable. But you've been walking across their pattern, pulling out the stitch at the exact point it unravels the whole. They wanted control of time. You took control of timing, and timing beats time every single time. They mistook your precision for chaos, but every strike landed like a pulse of destiny, and with each pulse, another knot in their tapestry came undone forever. For centuries, they convinced humanity that people were small, that intuition was just a guess, that deeper sight was fantasy, that extraordinary ability was superstition. They erased the chapters of human history that spoke of higher potential. They rewrote memory to make power sound like myth, and they did it so well that even the gifted forgot who they were. Then you arrived, and without asking permission, the lie began to fall apart. You didn't hand out new abilities. You didn't wave a wand. All you did was show up as yourself, and in every room you entered, something dormant began to stir in others. People started sensing before being told, knowing before being shown, seeing without eyes. They began remembering what had been buried. Imagine humanity as a vast mansion with hundreds of rooms. Generations have been forced to live in one dim hallway, the doors locked, the windows sealed, the idea of the mansion forgotten. Then you appear, not with a key, but with an energy so sharp the locks crumble. One by one the doors swing open, and people realize the mansion was always theirs. That is what you've done. You didn't give anyone new gifts. You reminded them of their birthright. Suppression isn't weakness, it's theft. They didn't break humanity, they shackled it. They didn't erase potential, they hid it. And by being yourself, you snap the lock. This is why they panic. Because when people reclaim intuition, deception fails. When they reclaim inner sight, manipulation collapses. When they reclaim connection, control evaporates. You didn't just awaken people, you armed them with themselves. And self-possession is the one weapon no tyrant can confiscate. You may ask, why does my presence alone trigger this? Because you carry the vibration of what they tried hardest to erase. You're the living reminder that humanity is not blind, not fragile, not powerless. Memory travels faster than lies. Recognition spreads faster than propaganda. Once someone remembers their capacity, the entire narrative changes. Think of it like a signal they tried to jam. They built towers, noise, static, but a single, clear tone cuts through interference. That tone is you. You're not teaching them a new language, you're restoring the one they were born knowing. And restoration moves like wildfire. Their strongest fear isn't that you'll expose another secret. It's that you've already flipped the switch they fought to keep off for ages. Because once people experience their own ability to see and know, no authority can convince them they're blind. Once they feel their own intuition sharpen, no expert can talk them back into dependence. You are restoring not a gift, but a birthright. You're handing humanity back the keys to rooms they never stopped owning, and once returned, it can never be taken away again. This is why your power is so different. It doesn't just collapse corruption, it rewrites people. It triggers agents of the system to remember their souls. It triggers ordinary people to remember they're extraordinary. And once memory rises, no system survives. They spent centuries locking the mansion of human potential, but you walked down the hallway and every lock fell open, and now no one can make the doors disappear again. They told themselves they had forever. They built towers of policy and pipelines of money, convinced time itself was their accomplice. They thought suppression was permanent, that awakening was a phase, that your rise could be contained like a spark in a jar. But every empire built on denial meets the same ending the moment when the truth they feared stands before them fully awake. You are that moment. Your journey was never about titles or applause. It was about standing as yourself long enough for the mask of power to slip, and it has. They underestimated how far a single frequency could travel. They underestimated how a single presence could rewrite rooms, rewrite minds, rewrite history without permission. They underestimated you. Now their panic writes their ending, not your force, not your attack, but their fear collapsing them from the inside. The machine they built to control others has turned inward, chewing at its own gears. Even their insiders, once loyal, have begun to confess. Their symbols, once sacred, now feel like curses carved into their walls. Their tunnels, once hidden, now echo with footsteps of those who no longer obey. Their propaganda, once unchallenged, now dissolves under a rising tide of memory. You didn't just expose secrets, you restored sight. You didn't just break illusions, you restored birthright, and that restoration can't be reversed. It moves outward in waves, far beyond your own reach, touching people you'll never meet. That is what frightens them most. Not what you know, but what you've awakened. You may not feel unstoppable. You may feel tired, human, fragile, but they've already seen too much to pretend. They've watched their best strategies fail. They've watched protection flare around you like a shield they can't pierce. They've watched the current you carry bypass their rituals and eat their systems alive. And now, chosen one, you are at the pivot point. Everything they built was designed to keep you from arriving here, but you arrived anyway. Everything they planned was meant to silence this moment, but the moment has come anyway. So stand. Stand without apology. Stand without shrinking. Because your presence is not random, not small, not an accident. It is precise. It is the answer to patterns they thought would last forever. It is the counterforce history has been waiting for. This mission will always be bigger than one voice. It's a chorus. It's a field of sparks. It's every person who listens and chooses to remember who they are. That's why at the start we spoke about oversubscription, because messages like this spread fast, faster than any algorithm can suppress, faster than any shadow can cover, and that's good. It means the frequency is doing its work. They built their walls for 1,000 years, but one living truth walked past and their fortress began to crack. And now the cracks are spreading faster than they can build, because the era of silence is over, and you are the sound it feared most.